Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn McEntee. This is Youth for Change and Spotlight on Youth. I am your host for today and really looking forward to speaking to the upcoming guests here. Our focus today is community innovation, partnerships and mentors, and finding your voice. Youth for Change is dedicated to improving the quality of youth and enriching the learning activities and sustainable networking skill sets for mind, body, and balance and communication skills. We foster cultural environments and where artistic talent can thrive. Please follow us on social media. And if you had any suggestions for upcoming shows, you're welcome to contact me at lynn@youthforchange.ca. And perhaps you have a guest idea and we'd be happy to follow up on that for you. Today I am hosting, and I'm very excited to host Jenny Mitchell. She is a Guelph-based multidisciplinary artist who's specializing in drawing, silk screening, and storytelling. She was the City of Guelph's inaugural RBC Market Mornings artist in 2014 and operates the Golden Bus, a mobile collaborative art space. Jenny is currently the volunteer and mobile studio coordinator for CFRU and has released 11 albums of original music, giving her skills in audio recording and music production. That is our one guest, Jenny Mitchell. And then we have Thurza Armstrong, who is our youth contributor today as well. And she is the coordinator at Guelph 2 Library and the host of their podcast called The Crow's Nest. So excited to host both of you. Lots happening in the community and lots happening in your lives. Jenny, I'd like to start out with you first, if you don't mind. And today we're talking about Spotlight on Youth, and I know you work with a lot of youth in the community. And if you sort of took us through CFRU and how that takes you out into the community and meeting our young people in society. Tell us a little bit about that and your work.
Yeah, so I'm the volunteer and mobile studio coordinator. So for the volunteer coordinator part of my job, I would be sort of the first person you meet if you want to get involved. So if you come up to the station to find radio, you'll find me and I will take you on a general orientation and sort of set you up with the tools and resources we have there to get somebody started on their radio journey. The mobile studio part of my job is pretty unique to our station. It's a project that decided to take radio outside the campus and traditional station to places in the community where people don't have those opportunities otherwise, or maybe don't get to share their voices or perspectives or stories as often. So, sort of recognizing accessibility to include if people just can't get up to the station or aren't comfortable in that environment. So, senior centers, schools, neighborhood spaces have all been popular places to bring the mobile studio. And yeah, there I would be aspiring to reach people kind of in their own comfortable spaces and give them an opportunity to share what they want, and by extension, where possible, give them the tools to continue to produce radio. So whether they want to go on to host their own podcasts or work on their own projects. So yeah, I like to think I can make a studio anywhere, and that's kind of my fun that I get to have out there. So yeah, that sort of encompasses my position, I think.
That's really cool, Jenny. You must meet a lot of people, obviously at the station as well. But when you're out in the community, and let's say I've heard that you work with schools, I've seen you work in the school system as well. And if you could tell us about that, because we are a program about Spotlight on Youth and how important it is to give youth a voice in our community in today and the future of tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I mean, one really valuable service that the mobile studio's gotten to provide in schools, for example, is for kids who don't necessarily thrive in the traditional classroom, or some of them do, but then they're done their work and there's, more in them to give. I have a completely different opportunity for them to express themselves. So I get a lot of students who are done their work and looking for something else, something outside the books. And then I get a lot of kids who weren't doing their work anyway and need like a totally different way to engage. And so I think, yeah, giving them the resources and the tools and the training to use computer and recording software, and it's like another language and another form of communication. So it's definitely about them sharing their stories and perspectives, but I think it's equally them having access to different tools in case those tools will be the good fit. So I had one student, for example, who doesn't read or write, but had written like 10 books because he was doing the voice to text translate thing. And when he learned to do audio editing, that became his like just wheelhouse. Like just was a master at editing, an amazing radio host, and asked the best questions. And so all of that communication and sharing and everything was in there, but it didn't come out in reading or writing. So he may not have even done well in a language class, for example, but give him something like radio or podcast. So he was contributing to like interviewing the mayor and the Green Party MPP Mike Schreiner, and like, yeah, really amazing people in the community, and just had the opportunity to ask the questions that he would ask for him to do his own learning. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of independence and autonomy that builds in.
Would this be a good time, Thursday, for you to jump in as well? And we'll double back on some of Jenny's input regarding working with youth in the school system and in our community. What about yourself? Could you tell us about you and how you came to the table of working in your environment? Tell us a little bit about that and what your contribution is and you expect your contributions to be as a youth moving forward.
Yeah. So I came into podcasting pretty on accident, I guess. It wasn't really something I've ever, I guess, aspired to do. Maybe in like a fun way with friends where I was just kind of, maybe one day we'll start a podcast. Wouldn't that be interesting? But I've always been much more of like a visual artistic communicator. But I'm involved with the Guelph Tool Library and have been since I was their summer student last year in 2019. And they had a contract available this year that part of it was just starting a podcast. And I took the opportunity to make myself super uncomfortable and put myself way outside of my, I guess, area of expertise and just see what I could do. And so I spent the summer, I guess, struggling, really, if I'm being honest, and just figuring out from the ground up every aspect of what it took to record and to edit and to market myself to potential guests, and then to market myself to the tool library as a project and to my audiences. I learned about so many behind the scenes type stuff. And yeah, it was fun. We did a couple episodes, only about 9, which I guess isn't a lot for a podcast, which are usually many, many episodes, I found. But it was a great opportunity to sort of problem solve our way through it and figure out the unique needs of starting a podcast through a nonprofit organization like the Tool Library, with so many voices involved, and so many different opinions and aspects and projects that make up the sort of quilt network of the Tool Library and the impact that we have on the community. And so I guess, to sort of like roundaboutly answer your question, my personal impact on that, I think, is to sort of facilitate even more voices to come through. I'm hoping to create the podcast, sort of revamp it as like a collective. So start a committee that not everyone, I don't think, would be hosting. And sort of, I guess, to give people the opportunity who maybe don't want to be out there hosting or aren't as social to make an impact, to get out in the community, to ask questions that they want to ask, maybe even though they don't want to be the ones asking them. So that's sort of where we're going right now.
Thursday, that's amazing. It sounds very intriguing. I'm very interested in following along and what's happening, and how important is mentorship to you, and sort of when you arrived on the scene, if you will, and all those new experiences coming at you, and you're stepping outside the box, and that's really what we're about in Spotlight on Youth, stepping outside the box and making change, right, and growing as you go. So is there someone that you really hooked onto when you were there to kind of ground you, if you will?
Honestly, there were a couple people. Jenny was definitely one of them. Part of what I think made it so difficult was that I was doing it all from home during COVID. So my ability to connect with people was very limited, especially because I didn't have a lot of expertise or experience on how to facilitate any of this. So really, Jenny, like as soon as I got the contract and knew that podcasting was going to be part of this, like the first thing I did was message Jenny and please, can you help me? I have no idea what I'm doing. And there were a couple instances of reaching out to people like that and just kind of being like, I don't even know what I don't know, but I know that you might be able to help me. So could you give us a shot? And I think that was part of what made it so fun and so rewarding, was that like 90% of the time the answer was yes. Like, I would love to help. Yes, I want to be a part of this. And that was really inspiring and made it a lot easier, a lot more worth, I guess, all the struggle was just to feel that, you know, those moments of connection to other people and experience, I guess, the knowledge transfer that I was trying to have on the podcast, you know, personally.
So then as far as on that human touch, did you feel that was quite different? That's kind of what you're saying, but you sort of embraced the moment and really had to hit the ground running and take all of these things coming at you and just see where you landed, right?
Yeah.
So very cool. And that's just so vulnerable and raw, you know, for us to, you know, allow ourselves to kind of open up like that. So I have great admiration for that, for you doing that and hearing the beginning of your journey there. I kind of wanted to go into sort of the what the tool library does, but then I can double back to Jenny on some of the aspects of the golden bus, and then I'd like to look at mental health and how important these connections are in our community as well. So Thursday, if you don't mind, I'll get you to continue on and tell us a little bit more about the tool library for those of our viewers and listeners who don't know.
Yeah, awesome. So the Tool Library is my favorite thing to talk about, so this is great. It is a nonprofit. We've been running in Guelph for I think 3.5, almost 4 years now, or maybe we just had our 4th birthday. We just had our 4th birthday. I should know that. But we're a nonprofit and we lend tools to the community. That's our main goal that started the program. And it basically comes from a place of wanting to help people who don't have the ability to purchase tools, who don't have the funds for them, don't have the space, don't have the need or the expertise to warrant purchasing a big saw when you're just doing one project. And we saw that there was a lot of, I guess, lacking there where people weren't able to get the tools and the knowledge and like the tools, like actual tools, but tools like resources as well, to be able to do these things for themselves. You know, they were having to hire contractors sort of always, or you're always having to purchase things. And that was another thing that we wanted to sort of reduce the amount of people buying things. You know, why have a tool where you're using it once every 6 months? And then all the other days it's not getting used, and then 6 of your neighbors buy the same tool because they also need it once every 6 months, when instead you guys could all just have the same one at your local tool library. And so that's where we started, and we've moved out. We have like craft supplies, we have DIY tools, we have kitchen appliances, dehydrators and bread makers. We've got a cotton candy machine and a rolling fruit press if you want to make cider, like a meat smoker. Like, we have so many really, really cool things. And we've expanded. We run workshops all the time, beeswax wrap making and silk screening. Right now we've got one coming up this weekend, which I guess it'll be past the time by the time this episode is out, but like you can build your entire Muskoka chair, which is really cool, with a professional teaching you how to build a Muskoka chair. And we've got workshops. We've got the repair cafe where you can bring your own items that are broken and have a volunteer fix them for free or by donation, and teach you how to fix your own items. So we're really all about helping empower people to be able to do things for themselves. And that's just like a small hint of the things that we do. We've got like a good call program for recycling cell phones. We do things with seniors. We've got Sew on the Go, and we've done Sew North, where we sent sewing machines to communities in Northern Canada. We've had like so many things that we do. Like too many to be able to talk about here, honestly.
Could you double back on the Northern Canada thing, if you don't mind? Tell us more about that. That's cool.
I was not involved with that project. It was before I got to the tool library, but I can definitely talk about it. We partnered up with a local church, and basically we took donations from people, sewing machines that were older, sewing machines that people didn't want, also like sewing adjacent supplies. Yeah, so like basically everything that you would need. We fixed them up. We made sure that the machines were all tuned up properly, and then we gave them to the church, and the church distributed them to people up north to help them with, because clothing can be so expensive and worn so quickly, and it's just so much easier to be able to mend it yourself, but that is so hard without a sewing machine. I did it for a long time without one, and it was definitely not worth it.
Wow, Thursday, I'll jump over to Jenny for a moment and how that speaks to community for both of you. It sounds like you're building the conversation on how important it is in our community, but also forming a community and communities with other people. Jenny, I wondered if you could speak to that, please and thanks.
Yeah, well, one thing that Thurza mentioned as a concept that really resonated with me is the concept of you don't always know what you don't know. I think that it's one thing if you know exactly what you want to figure out. There are tutorials, there's ways to learn things if you already know how to look into it and exactly what it is. But all of the ways in which we can learn about, say, other people, like our shared experiences, why a person came to you that day to get involved, as opposed to just like the literal why of like, I want to learn this. What else has gone into their lived experience that has sent them in your direction? And then like, what more can you do than just show them? Like I could, point out a microphone to somebody and show them how to hit record, but that's a completely different learning curve than thinking about how to meaningfully listen or make yourself vulnerable enough to have a conversation that both of you are contributing to in a thoughtful way. And so it's really interesting working with someone like Thurza because I feel like their podcast and their approach is very similar to the work that I do in that it's one of the more challenging forms of interviews. And because you're not talking to people who are used to being guests, you're often talking to people who will themselves say, I don't have a story, or you don't want to hear from me, or I'm not interesting, or like you'll be bored by this. And you have to try to empower them to realize that their story and voice has value. And that's a lot more work for the host, right? So, in a way, you as a host can get better and better or do more and more interviews, but it may never get easier in a way. You can get sort of a toolkit that you use personally to, work on where you put your emotions in a healthy way or questions that might spark more broad conversations. But ultimately, you're going to always have to show up and keep really working at those conversations. And so to me, they're like the most important ones because they're the ones that if you don't have them, that person continues to think they're not important or they're boring or they have nothing to share. So it's like, I don't know, it's super, I find it super fun to go out and try to find all of those people and to know that that's one more voice and one more history that we get to have. And I think like the more that I get to do that and the more I get to learn about people, the better sense I have of what Guelph is. And, when it comes to decisions around bureaucracy or like, should we build this? Should we do this? I feel so much better being informed by a ton of perspectives when I'm thinking about like a library, for example, rather than just as a building and what I would do. So it's sort of like the more these conversations are had and the more you get to hear about them as a listener, hopefully the more thoughtful and community minded you'll be in general about all of the decisions that you make.
Very, very interesting, Jenny. Thank you. And very well said, actually, for both of you. And when you look at the cross spectrum of people that you're interviewing, you're spending time with, that are you're having the gift of time together, if you will. What is that like? You sort of walk, let's say, for example, you're at the school and then you're with a senior at a senior's home who is sharing their story. And it is about validation. It is about the balance of our society and the circle of life and engaging everyone. So how do you see that being very important as you move through your circles? And then maybe I'll jump over to Thurza and that intergenerational learning.
Yeah, well, one thing that I have noticed is children, seniors, and people with either exceptionalities or who are maybe neuro non-typical, especially on the autism spectrum, those three categories of people are uh, among the most honest people that I have had the pleasure of engaging with. And it's kind of amazing because we can get right to the heart of what they want to talk about kind of right away. So I think in the case of children, they haven't had enough experience to have been silenced in the way that we do to ourselves. Like I feel like as we get older, we learn more and more about being polite or like where we should share, where we shouldn't, what we should share, what that should look like. And we start to develop a sense of self that's like framed her out of a lot of unhealthy things like being self-conscious or having low self-esteem or somebody one time shushed you and now you think you should never talk again. So I feel like kids sometimes are lucky enough to have not started to do that yet, and seniors are maybe lucky enough to have lived long enough that they're just done caring about that kind of presentation. And then yeah, people on the autism spectrum often for the like to my benefit also tell it like it is. And so I actually find those categories are the ones that have the least opportunities to share their voices because all three of those categories of people are often in spaces where they don't get out as much or they don't get to make as many independent choices about where they are. But they're also then some of the easiest ones to have a real, honest connection with. So it kind of works out perfectly. Like the people who are the most confident and the most independent will find their own way onto the airwaves. And they're also going to be the ones that are probably not going to be completely vulnerable or honest with me because they, are community members and they present. We all do. We all kind of put on a show to some extent when we show up places, and it's a natural thing to do. But yeah, I think the fact that when I go, I get to be 100% sure that a relationship was formed, that our conversation had value, because these are folks who would not tell me otherwise, They're going to be honest about how it went and how they felt. And that honesty is really beautiful, and it's almost always very positive, and I love it.
I love that. No filter, right?
Yeah.
I find it very refreshing, and also being in the education field as well. I totally appreciate what you're talking about. And I think it's awesome when someone does find their voice and how empowering it is. And just, it's almost like a breath of life. And it is important for people to realize that there is a story to be told. I was speaking with a group from Alberta last week, Storytelling Alberta, and they were just talking about their participants and them thinking, oh, I have no story to tell. But then as they kind of got involved and realized that people were listening, and a very, very important skill that we can foster, that they really wanted to speak. So Thursday, I just wanted to speak to you and the people that you meet in the community and you get an opportunity to speak with when they're finding their voice. What is that experience like for you as a host, unraveling the conversation with them, as Jenny was speaking to before? As your skills. Yeah.
I have always kind of struggled with that in my experience as a podcast host. I really love finding the connections between people and learning about them, and I guess sort of like finding the common ground, I guess, that everyone sort of has. But I'm very much not super good at the act of meeting new people. I always end up like stuttering over my words, and I am like super, super conscious of myself, like hyper conscious of just everything that I'm saying and doing and the way that might look to somebody else. And I'm sure that I could probably look back in my childhood and find the exact reason that I do that. But I just like, I found in podcast hosting that it just brought that out 100%. Like it became less of something that I just sort of kind of have to deal with, and you grit through it one time and then you've met somebody and you never have to do it again, because now I am meeting someone and then I am recording that and making it out in the internet forever. And so I kind of have to consciously overcome that behavior of being so self-conscious and being so focused inward when I'm meeting someone else, I guess. And I guess I kind of turned that inherently nervous energy outward and just like hyper focused on my guests. Just like everything that they were saying, it was like I had like a pen in one hand and I was like staring down the screen, like writing notes and stuff just to make sure that I didn't forget anything. And I was always asking, you know, the best questions that I could. And that was a little overboard as well. I should have probably, and I guess learned that I should just really focus on that connection piece of really just finding that common ground and that spark of conversation where you find something that like, oh, look, you like that too. I like that. Okay, we can talk about this and we can use that as a platform or like a way to infer the universe together for the rest of these questions, no matter what else we talk about, no matter like any sort of disagreements or maybe just like misses in connection, we have this one thing that we have together that we can like carry throughout this conversation. And so that was interesting as a host to, I guess, like third party watch myself try and build that skill and have those experiences with others.
Well, you're both agreeing to be on the scene and be vulnerable and allow yourself to unravel together, so to speak, right? And maybe perhaps the person being interviewed is also learning something about themselves along the way by just spending time with you, which is really super cool because the strategies that you're using, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and for yourself and sort of some of the coping mechanisms when you're getting ready to kind of get ready to go on the air, and if you were to recommend to somebody else, you know, what are some of those techniques that you might choose to kind of get you in that zone?
Yeah. For myself, I always kind of did my own little research on my guest and sort of whatever I could find online about them, which for a lot of people, that isn't a lot because most people are pretty regular and don't put all of their lives online. And that was not true for younger people like myself who do put a lot of our lives online. And then those who had like bodies of work that were there to be seen. And so that was a little easier. So I always suggest researching just to sort of figure out, even if it's not something that you think that you are going to be talking about, it's not really fitting the theme of your podcast, just to know that about another person is really valuable in that sort of game of connecting. And then another thing that I always did was just wrote down like every question that I could think of that I like had about this person. And I didn't always end up asking all of them. Sometimes we went off on some other tangent, or sometimes it ended up just not being relevant or maybe not a very good question. But sometimes the exact opposite happened where I would have a question that maybe wasn't that great. And even though I didn't want to use it, the fact that that question was there helped me formulate a new, better question that was even more introspective or interesting. And then I guess just the biggest thing for me was just being ready to do something very personal and not have personal feelings about it, which I think was hard. You kind of have to put yourself in a headspace where, you know, I'm having this conversation and I'm putting myself out there and I'm making myself vulnerable, but I can't be aware of all that because that doesn't make me a very good podcast host, because then I'm focusing on myself.
Interesting, because that would kind of speak to the filter that Jenny was talking about with someone in a younger situation, perhaps they just kind of go with it, you know, and yourself, you're learning that social cue to filter, right? Yeah, interesting. Sorry.
No, that's exactly it. Yeah, that it's just learning how to take yourself out of a moment, because as much as I want to, I guess, bring myself into a conversation with a guest, I also know that from a perspective of a host, I potentially have hundreds of episodes to have my audience know me. And I'm also a really repetitive person, and I know that about myself. So I know that if I say something, there is 100% chance that I will say it like 10 more times without realizing. So I have to try and really make sure that the knowledge of my itself or the things that I'm doing or the ways that I can relate to my guests, that I'm not so focused on me that I am compromising the integrity of the episode, I guess. Yeah. I guess that's it.
That's awesome. I like the integrity part as well. Jenny, I'm going to jump around and give Teresa a chance to just take a talking break if she wants, and just kind of listen in on your focus. Yeah, could you kind of talk about the students again and how important that is, and for you being there as a leader in the school, and you've put together radio shows with the kids before.
Yeah.
As you see them finding their voice, could you kind of share that with us? You spoke to that before, but just really how all that would unfold and from everything from A to Z.
Sure. So, yeah, I've worked with, I guess, basically every age of student at this point with various projects. So, one that I really love is when I worked with kindergarten students. And part of it, I was actually just listening back to one today. It was really making my son laugh because kids are so little in kindergarten. Like some kids are 3 turning into a 4-year-old. And then if you add into the equation, Guelph being as multicultural as it is, I was working in a kindergarten class where there were maybe only 3 children who were like native English speakers. So if you have 3 turning 4-year-olds who have their main first language, a language other than English, learning to talk because they are children, also learning to talk because they speak a different language at home. Having something like a radio and a recording opportunity is a whole other outlet that you don't really think about until you start to hear what it means. So when kids get to hear their voices through headphones, or in the case what we were actually doing, we were in a kindergarten classroom recording in one corner and broadcasting to a different place in the classroom. So those children could actually, other children in the class could gather around a listening station and hear their classmates who are just across the room. But without seeing those kids and without kind of jumping to conclusions, they started to hear things about their classmates or hear them pronounce things and in a way that they didn't pick up on in person. So there's one in particular who had a support worker because he was having some challenges in the classroom. And again, he's like 4 years old, but for whatever reasons was extra articulate on the microphone. So the struggles he has in the classroom were completely gone in the context of recording. So he was actually arguably the best at it. And this was a kid that, because of all the other struggles that his classmates would see him go through on a daily basis, was probably left out of a lot of things because his ability and like what they thought he was capable of was probably already kind of like lesser than. Because these are 4-year-olds jumping to conclusions too, right? So it's just like a big package of kids are already being set up to be less than, but not on purpose on anybody's point. But it having the opportunity to express yourself a different way that early on and gain that respect of your classmates is just so huge. And it plays out like that through every age of student. And the tech part of it is worth mentioning too, because yes, there's hosting and there's asking questions, there's expressing yourself, but learning how to facilitate it. Like I had people who were in the role of active listening, kind of like producers. So they maybe didn't want to ask the questions, but they were so good at thinking of them. So they'd be listening in real time and jotting things down and sliding them over to a host as another thing to consider asking, or learning how to edit it so that their classmates and the guests sound the most sort of professional or polished. And so there were kids who were doing extra work in the class to be able to leave to come over and edit with me. And editing, I remember one teacher telling me that the kid thriving in editing gave her something positive to say on his report card, when otherwise there was nothing she could point to that was like particularly exceptional. He was just not a great classroom kid. So these things happen all the time where it's just a new and different opportunity that isn't kind of like packaged with all of the issues or worries. And I think it helps that I'm not their parent and I'm not their teacher. I'm like something else, and I'm a thing they don't have to do, but I'm a thing they can do. So there's a sort of freedom in coming and choosing that, which is something that is usually not given to them, that choice. And then they choose it, and they haven't already got all this baggage. So they just come in with a more open mind. And I think the coolest part is when these kids are given these tools and they get to come up with their own questions. um, it's like permission to prod and wonder without fear of backlash. So it's not looked at as talking back, or, the teacher says something and then they say why and then they're in trouble. It's an opportunity to say why, and everyone is so happy that you're saying why. And so it's just unpacks a lot of the challenges, I think, with the traditional learning in schools. And that's not talking down about those, but there are definitely still kids that's a struggle the way it's traditionally done. So I think it's just got a myriad of positive benefits.
Interesting. I taught international students for sure, and designed my own school for, the very thing you're talking about. And I remember having students do an Afghani radio hour, and I just loved that, all of those things that you're talking about, that empowerment to use your voice and to incorporate stories from their culture, but also to into a new community. And it was just so awesome and empowering. I love that in the school, working in the classroom as well. And I know of the programming that you're talking about, Jenny, for sure. And I know that you have truly contributed and made quite a difference in the lives of the kids that you're working with, for sure. And all across the spectrum, for sure. And I think everybody is welcome at the table with you. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place, right? And there's a
Yeah.
place that, right? It's kind of what you said, no judgment, just arriving on the scene and just whatever happens. And Thursday was speaking to that too. It's just like, just surrendering yourself to the moment, right? If you could share a story, Thursday, from an interview that you have done, perhaps, of someone that you have felt like, you know what, we've really just crossed over there to the other, and in conversation, or I think they really got what I was trying to engage them in, or yeah.
I actually have a story. It's not from being a podcast host,
Okay,
though,
cool.
but it was Jenny's story reminded me. I was a couple of years ago, I was a camp counselor in Kitchener for the city, and one of the last weeks there, there was a child, and he was on the younger end of the kids that we had there. So I think he was probably 4 or 5. And he didn't speak any English. He was super new to Canada. The sweetest boy that I had probably seen the entire summer, but like literally no English. I think he knew no, and that was it. And we took a field trip to the CBC radio station that was close to our camp. And all of the kids got the opportunity to sit in the recording booth and read this little script. And if they weren't old enough to read, there was like a girl there to help them. And they all had the best time, like learning about recording and hearing their own voices play back. And then we had other kids who were in the rest, like the listening part of the CBC radio part. I don't even know what they're called, but then they were like on the other side of the glass, like screaming because these kids were talking on the radio, and it was the coolest thing. But this one kid, he didn't speak any English, and so I was very curious to how he was going to handle being in there and recording, but also handle the pressure of knowing that he was expected to be talking and reading this script, and knowing that he couldn't speak English. And he literally blew me away. They read the script off for him to repeat back, and he repeated it like he had been talking English his entire life. It was honestly incredible to watch, and he had this like huge smile on his face. It was like this really, really just beautiful moment of connection, really, not between me, between him and this woman helping him record, and just, I don't know, it was just probably one of my favorite moments from the summer, and one of my favorite memories that I have, just watching this kid like blossom in front of me and have such a lovely experience.
That's really cool, and the purity of all that, right? Of being together and letting that all happen. And what it's kind of cool also is the multilingual storytelling, right? Or multilingual interviews and the on air. And I just love that component of it, and how a child or a senior or anyone in the community can share, certainly telling the story in English, of course, but as well telling it in their first language or second or third sometimes. And that is awesome. So you can take that journey with them too. Sometimes we don't always have to understand all the words, but just being in the space together and feeling that story with them. Super cool. Then I would like to jump over to Jenny again, and I would love to just kind of get into what this golden bus is all about. I know you're very well known in the community with the golden bus.
Yeah, well, so the Golden Bus, it predates CFRU for me. So CFRU's been around for 40 years, this past year, but the Golden Bus was born out of, so part of the incentive was my dad ran the family thrift store for almost 20 years, and then after that had Disarray Antiques. But when he had the family thrift store, we used to have concerts at night. And it was my first real relationship with like an unusual concert setting. And it kind of birthed nothing but unique circumstances. Like there wasn't a single show that I could describe as traditional because you were sitting on weird thrift chairs or on piles of bedding. People were buying mattresses between the bands. Like it was just totally surreal. But it was actually my first foray into hosting shows was in that environment. So when the store got closed because they wanted to use the footprint for something else and he got booted out, um, I never really found anything to replace it. I have had a few other favorite little places, but it always seemed like some landlord or some city use or something could take them away. So I decided I wanted to make my own alternative performance space where I would own it outright. And if it was mobile, then I could drive away from that drama. So if I'm parked somewhere that needs to use the space for something else, rather than like all of that work and all that effort being having to start over again, which I've seen for so many amazing organizations, just having to start again and start again and start again. And it burns people out and it's depressing sometimes and it uses resources. And I was just like, I'm going to own it and I'm going to drive it to where people are happy for it to be there. And we're going to have our own little intimate gathering. And the other part of it was that I like things that aren't always going to demand a huge audience or aren't going to attract a huge audience. So my favorite shows are when there's 5 to 10 people there. And in a normal traditional venue or one that is dependent on bar sales or ticket sales, in a traditional sense, that's just not feasible. So most spaces don't set themselves up to be comfortable and safe and anti-oppressive, for example, for a small number of people. It's very hard to maintain that. And so if I had my own small space with 20 people or less, and I was the only person welcoming people through that door, then I could be sure that it was going to be comfortable and safe for everybody, and that the moments we had together would be our own, that they would never be quite like that again, or wouldn't have been on a different day in a different place. So there's just everything about moving the space and the small intimacy, and then the promise of like, at least like strong intention to maintain a safe space. I obviously can't guarantee what an experience will be like for everybody, but I know that that I can close my doors and say no to people entering that space if I don't trust that they're going to hold up that side of it. And so, yeah, it's just been an incredible opportunity to host performers and film screenings and community gatherings where everybody that sets foot is willing to be part of that experience. It's just awesome. And it's literally an ex-transit bus. I guess it didn't describe that, but it's 40-foot gold bus that was a transit bus and is now a mobile performance space.
So Jenny, you own that, and where do you look for places to park it? If you're ever looking for places, this would be a good time to kind of do a shout out, perhaps.
Oh yeah, no, always, because it is 40 feet long. So There's always places you can pay to park things and kind of hide them behind a locked fence. And what I'm always looking for is spaces to park it where there's community, because there's sort of a synergy that happens. When I used to be parked by Diode, a maker space in downtown Guelph, uh, it was not a coincidence that that's where I found myself. That was how the bus was possible, was a bunch of innovative makers who would literally just walk by and see me attempting to do something that I was completely unable to do, and walk in with their amazing ideas and do it more interestingly or more efficiently or just more creatively or whatever it was. So I love to be parked places where other people's ideas might walk by, you know? And I think that's the biggest challenge with the pandemic, to be honest, is there's much less random happenstance coming across the people with ideas. It's all so much more planned and intentional. And I think that's the thing I'm struggling with the most. But yeah, if anyone's listening and has room for a 40-foot bus and a turning radius in and out of that room, um, and wants to share ideas, I guess that's where I want to be.
In times where you were able to travel around before the COVID, and certainly post-COVID as well, looking forward to that, where are some of the spaces that you took your space to allow others to be in the collective space?
Well, I think probably the most interesting was we took it all the way out to the East Coast and back. So I'm a musician and I've toured lots of times across the country. But I would say in recent years, it's become more and more of a priority for me to know that a safe space is what I will arrive to. So having my own venue and kind of like being the filter through which the audiences come on was some of the most beautiful shows I've ever played. But it was amazing because I would maybe connect with a traditional venue who would run an extension cord outside their venue to my bus. And then people go in there maybe to have a drink or something and then come over and sit and watch my show. So yeah, we were in front of weird little lakes. We were parked adjacent to normal venues. We were in fields. When we had full sunlight, we could be solar powered. So we could be pretty much anywhere. We were like outside a silo at one point. And so the space itself always the same inside, but the environment around it completely different. And that was just like a really surreal experience. And it could bring music to towns that don't have a traditional venue of any sort. And they still have people, they still have music lovers, but those people usually have to go somewhere else to do that. So yeah, we parked in some of the weirdest little towns that don't have traditional venues, are the easiest to find parking spots because of that very same thing. So it was easier for me to be, you know, outside of a big city. I didn't even go to Montreal, for example, and that's unheard of on an East Coast tour. And it was amazing. We were in the tiniest little towns, and I loved it.
Wow. How do you see the stories changing? I'm going to jump over to Thursday shortly, but how do you see the stories changing when you're traveling with the bus and as the different communities that you meet?
Yeah, I think it's just like it's kind of a conversation starter. It's really similar to the root of what Thursday was talking about and what I talk about when it comes to hosting
Mhm.
and kind of finding a point of intersection. It's just like a giant golden icebreaker. Like if someone has found their way to the bus, you already know that they're a little bit unusual and open-minded, you know? So it's like instead of, I guess, performing in a space and then walking off the stage and hoping that you find one or two people in the room that you could have a genuine connection with or that you can trust to be respectful and nice to talk to, um, everyone in the room is that person. It's like there's not going to be a single person that you're sharing a space with that isn't in that category. Because how the heck did they end up on the bus? If they are a person that, you know, is closed-minded and ignorant and unsafe. It just doesn't happen. So it just was like a whole side of my concerns as a performer for making sure that my audience is safe were just gone. It was just a non-issue for a 2 week stretch. And that's just a very like liberating experience.
Oh, Thursday, would you be able to speak to what it's like traveling around on a bus? I know that you've had experience with that as well. And could you tell us a little bit more about what you do in terms of the traveling bus?
Yeah, my bus it's a pretty new experience, so I actually haven't done much traveling in it as much as I traveled to go get it, and now it is in my driveway. And now it has been in my driveway and hasn't moved for months. Yeah, I got my bus just after I finished my tool library contract. I had always kind of thought it was so cool, the bus life and that whole experience, but somehow thought it wasn't for me, you know, like there's no way I could ever do something like that. There's no way that I could be the kind of person who, you know, things like that happen to, which I definitely already was. There was no worries there. But I just spent so long kind of like being my own barrier to that sort of living, and thinking that I really needed to be living like this sort of standard life that I thought everyone was supposed to, of go to university, get a job, be successful, 3-step plan. But I just, there was this couple who used the tool library tools to build their own bus and then went on a honeymoon. That was cut short during COVID, but it was supposed to be through the United States for like 18 months. And it was just that I heard their story, and that they had never had any kind of experience before. They just literally bought a bus and then learned how to build one. And I was like, well, okay, I can do that. I can do that. If anyone else can do it with that little experience, like I can definitely do it. And so I kind of went out. I had like my little secret emergency money stash, and I went out and found a bus, and it was running, and that was good enough for me. So I bought it, and actually that's a lie. It wasn't running. It didn't even run when I bought it. And yeah, so it's definitely, I'm doing it in an interesting way. I've learned now that I'm sort of part of the schoolie community, that a lot of people put incredible time and energy and resources into their buses. They use them as, you know, retirement investments, put their entire house's equity into the build. And I am taking a much looser route, where I just sort of am trying to figure out as I go what I need. And it's a pretty slow process. To anyone who is trying to legitimately live the bus life and have it be a good one, be prepared for it to be an incredibly slow process. 6 months to multiple years sometimes. But it's already super rewarding, and really, like Jenny said, it brings so much freedom. I had a similar experience, not in music venues, but just in moving like every 6 months to like every year once I left home and in university. And that's just so tiring. And I am such a person who, my spaces are so important to me. My wall colors have to be, you know, pretty or appealing, or I get really sad. The lighting has to be right. The photos have to be there. I have to see myself in my surroundings, and that's really hard to do when you're moving so often. And so the bus sort of became my beacon of hope, in that I can move as much as I want, and I can live a life as free and as flexible and sort of last minute-esque, without having to sacrifice my need for comfort and my need for like homeliness. Like I'm such a home person, a homebody, I think that, yeah. And it was just really awesome to internalize the fact that I didn't have to give that up to be able to live a really interesting, independent life. So that's sort of the train that I'm trying to get on. And even though I haven't done a whole lot of work on the bus itself, I'm really excited to get it going. So I'm also looking for a space to work on it. So if anybody has room for me to build a bus in their backyard or something, that would be really awesome.
In your case, where does one find a bus if they want to purchase a bus?
Kijiji.
There you go.
But be very careful, because the buses out there are not very good. Not very many people are selling affordable buses that are in good condition. Honestly, if I had gone back in time to redo my bus, I probably wouldn't get the one that I bought. I love her. She's a great bus. Very quirky, lots of interesting, fun, round shapes that make it very hard to reliably do things, because lots of building needs right angles, especially when you're welding and doing structural things. So the fun roundness that I liked is going to end up being my downfall a little bit, I think. And I wish that I had done a little bit more research onto things like that to be able to catch those kinds of details. But yeah, it's fine. Just be careful when you're trying to buy the bus, because the people who are out there selling them for schoolies usually know that it's people who don't have a ton of building experience. So you could easily get swindled.
I'm thinking about you putting yourself out there, and that's almost symbolic, the purchase of the bus, really, for you, as you're looking to grow in various directions. When you do see it evolve, do you see that as being a performance space for you, or as well as a living space, perhaps? Or I was wondering about that, if you could just share that just a wee bit more.
Yeah. So I would like it to be really everything. And I'm learning that I'm going to have to compromise a little bit on that, because it is only like 6 by 12 feet of interior living space, which is not a lot. But I'm like an artist in my free time, and hopefully one day will be career-wise if I can get that going. And so I would love for it to be a space that I can reliably create and have room, because at least for me, creation is a very messy, very big process that requires a lot of open space that buses don't always have. So I'm having to be super, super, I can't think of the word, using like a lot of ingenuity to try and fit everything that I'm trying to do into it. Just because I don't want it to limit me at all. You know, the bus is supposed to be my sort of magnum opus of experience, and I like to try doing so many things, and I want the bus to elevate all of those things. And so yeah, like I would love for it to be like a musical space and an art space and a collaborative working everything. And I think it's possible. There's, you know, a spot on the roof for a stage, probably. That would be super cool. So yeah, it's just trying to find the balance between my very, very detailed and lofty dreams and what I can reasonably do with my own muscles and my very tight bank account.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Lots of community innovation going on. So I appreciated your stories. I wanted to speak to the sort of the circle of life. We've talked about youth for sure, and the importance of storytelling through youth. And how important is it, Jenny, for you, and working with seniors as well? You've done a lot of that, actually, and you go into seniors' homes, is that correct?
Yeah, like during the pandemic, I'm not physically going in for safety precautions, but I've actually done more interviews with seniors since the pandemic started than almost the entirety of my previous radio life. The one senior center in particular, Village of Riverside Glen here in Guelph, the general manager there, Bryce McBain, is just he's one of those superhumans I just don't fully understand, like the level of commitment that he had that was so apparent and so present right away around making sure that the seniors there had access to visitors and socializing and stuff, and while managing presumably everything else about running a senior center is just incredible. So a senior resident, Lloyd Hetherington, reached out and said that he wanted to tell stories. He wanted to, I think he wanted to start a podcast, or he was just kept meeting people. His wife had passed away and he was a relatively new resident. And then the pandemic hit and he's like, we have stories to share. The media is portraying this dark and depressing reality of us all being trapped in these spaces. And that hides the fact that we have wonderful lives. Like we feel safe and we feel supported and we have interesting things to tell you about. And so he really was just super motivated to get that story out, to say that the very same thing that you're framing as us being oppressed or trapped is what's keeping us safe. And we're building community with each other and you should hear about it. And so that's where I came in. I was like, yes, I will get your stories out, all of you, and I won't alter them. I won't affect them. I'm just going to share them. And kind of similar to how I describe the relationship with the children at schools where I'm not a teacher and I'm not their parent. Me coming in as a visitor during a pandemic when visitors are harder to come by, um, and being somebody that isn't someone they have to live next to or isn't somebody working for them or working with them, has just a completely different, I guess, set of ears. It's just a different person to talk to. So they may be hesitant in some cases to burn bridges or rub someone the wrong way if they know that that's their roommate for the rest of their days. And they may not want to be a burden on staff if they feel like their story's too long and that person must have somewhere else they have to be. But when I show up and they know they've got that hour and it's all about them and it's all about their story and every story counts, there's just like a beautiful like release that happens. And I just love it. I love it so much. And so day after day, sometimes 2 or 3 guests a day sharing these life stories with me. And it's really heavy. Like there's a lot of strong and intense emotions in there too, but there's also just like permission to be a bit more candid and a bit more honest. And yeah, I think it's just it's helped me get through the pandemic in the biggest way. Because when I said earlier that it's hard to find random circumstance or like that kind of time where you stumble across somebody and a new conversation's born, this is probably the closest I get because I never know who I'm going to meet and I don't know anything about them. I don't get to research them. I'm just showing up and we're starting a conversation. And and I hear them sometimes like, I have a visitor on the TV and it's adorable. And I'm like, I'm your TV visitor today. And it's just great. They love when I come and it makes me really happy.
And some of those stories, Jenny, I just love seeing your joy and describing your experiences with them. And you mentioned some of the stories are heavier in tone. And I think how important is it to again, just as we're speaking for youth, but our seniors to have that voice to be able to share things on a heavier note, if they will, and they don't have, they can go at it raw with you, and that you are creating that safe space. As you mentioned, you're creating it on the bus, you're creating it as you're interviewing your guests. And that's important for you. I can see that when you're talking. So those raw stories, very, very important. If you were thinking of a youth, for example, and feeling comfortable to do that with you and share a story in a heavier tone, a safe place to be able to do that in terms of sharing their mental health or feeling uncomfortable about something or anti-bullying education. How important do you think the forum is necessary for them to do so?
Yeah, I think it all definitely helps. I am a really strong believer in the fact that we need space to put feelings, and we don't traditionally make that space a lot of the time. Like right now, we're all living through a pandemic, and for example, we don't get to know when it will end or what an end will look like. And so a lot of us are feeling like a sense of loss or there's things we can't do and we're mourning them, but then we feel guilty because other people have lost more. Or say you can't see someone right now that you really love, whether it's a senior in a care center or it's a school age kid in your life that you're not in their bubble. You don't get to have like like a ceremony of goodbye because they're not gone, they're just over there, but you feel like they're gone. You don't have any of the pieces that makes it feel like they're there. So I feel like any time that we're dealing with those tricky emotions, those super valid, heavy, real experiences, but you keep saying, but someone else this, or no one understands, or you don't know who to talk to about it or where to put it. They're all like just these bottled up things. And it happens with joy too, when you're just inexplicably happy about something that no one else understands. And you don't know where to put that. And I think just any time that you create an opportunity for somebody to find a new outlet where you've given them permission to have the feelings, whether they're positive or negative, is just helpful. It's just a bit of a release and it's a validation, and then they can go on with their day and maybe settle back into a regular amount of emotions for the rest of the relationships or responsibilities they have that day. And I just think anytime we can give someone a healthy place to express themselves and share those things that, I mean, one really neat thing with radio is you don't know who's listening. So you can envision that somewhere out there you're creating a tether to someone who understands you. So you can picture that person when you're expressing yourself instead of literally looking around a room and being like, none of these guys get it. So it's just, to me, feels like a conduit to the people who will understand you somewhere, and a little voice out there, you know, kind of like fishing or something, and you don't know what's gonna come off the line. And I think that, I don't know who's gonna need to hear that person's story, but somebody might, and it might be a really meaningful experience for them. But I definitely know the person sharing it deserves to have a place to put it.
That's awesome. Love it. Thank you so much. Unpack the joy, if you will, and make your way back to the joy, if you will. I know a person I was interviewing the other day said the same thing, and I paraphrased it, so to speak. And it's interesting. That seems to be the common theme for me for some reason this week. Thank you for sharing that. There's as a young person, and all of the things that are going on right now and the changes that are happening, how relevant do you see radio voice being and podcast voice being for people in our community in terms of civic engagement? So if there's for yourself in terms of podcasting and radio broadcasting and finding a voice, and how important do you think it is for youth today for civic engagement?
I think honestly, it's really important. I think that podcasting sometimes, or just radio in general, gets a little bit left behind. I know that, you know, like I grew up listening to songs like Video Killed the Radio Star, that sort of thing. Like TV was really the bomb, and then the internet, you know, and I know my generation, I can't speak for everybody, but I think at least for myself and my circles, like the way that we engage is so much more text and visual based that a lot of the time radio kind of gets left behind, and podcasts have really brought that back, which is really cool. I don't listen to podcasts that often. I don't do super well with like focusing on just auditory cues. I get super distracted and then lose them completely. So podcasts listening wise has never been my thing. But the fact that there's just so much information out there and so many people who just started a podcast, I'm really passionate about this one very niche topic, and I just want to talk about it for 40 minutes twice a week, and I hope that, you know, other people might be interested in it. And then there's like 100,000 people who really are, who also love that niche topic. I think it's a really, really incredible way to connect in a really like passive way, that you're just sort of, you're listening and you're engaging and you're intaking this host's thoughts and feelings without having to directly engage back with it, which gives a lot of people the opportunity to just, you know, listen and learn without that expectation or that pressure. And then I think with Corona specifically, so many people have been, pretty much everyone has just been sort of jumbled up, you know, like nobody really knows how to get our feet back under ourselves after this quarantine has really just kind of, I don't even have any words for it. Like it's just changed everything. And even when we went back up into phase 3, nobody really knew what to do with themselves. And I think that for the tool library specifically, having a podcast to be able to reach our members and our community has been a really interesting possibility for us that we're just sort of learning how to explore, because so much of our community interactions were just that time that we saw somebody dropping off tools or picking them up, and it was these really lovely 30-second interactions where we could learn about our members and our members could learn about us, and we just completely missed that. And our membership numbers, our engagement, everything that we have that could be sort of pulled and extrapolated information from has shown that we're really struggling without that connection. It's an absolutely integral part of the way that the tool library operates. And so to have this new medium that we're trying out to reach our community and, I don't know, like show them that we still exist and hope that they won't forget about us is just really exciting and really scary. There's so many possibilities. I don't know if this answers your question at all, honestly. I'm kind of rambling, but podcasts are really cool. That's the takeaway.
Again, so that's what it is. It's just swirling around in conversation, right? It's just kind of sometimes doubling back and just like almost in your living room. I really appreciate sort of you just kind of navigating your way that way and just being relaxed. So thank you. I appreciate it. So Jenny, I just wondered if you could speak to civic engagement for the work that you're doing and the different avenues, whether it be the Golden Bus, interviewing someone on the radio, or working on the new project where you're artist in residence for the city of Guelph. How do you see civic engagement right now during COVID happening for youth, and how important is it more than ever to keep our youth engaged?
I think I think to speak to the project I'm doing, Golden Guelph, which is my artist in residency project, it's a sort of silkscreen and storytelling project. And so it was pitched pre-pandemic. It may have looked a different way if we were allowed to gather in spaces, but I think one of the reasons it was chosen was because it actually sort of thrives in, like, for all the opportunities we've lost because of the pandemic, or all of the confusion and chaos and, you know, mixed feelings and all those things. Like, theirs is totally right. There's totally chaos and confusion and big feelings, but there's opportunities too. People are sharing differently because of it. And I have gotten everything out of focusing on that part. Like, what are we doing differently now that could be to our benefit? And I think people are feeling cathartic and heard when they're allowed to talk about the past. It's like easy to talk about the past and think of it as loss, and it is loss, but there's times where things just are never going to be the same again. And you still like the new way too. Like, you might even like what something became, but you remember it a different way, and there's room for that as well. So my project was and is, I guess, focused around telling Guelph's history, but from our personal perspectives. So from different points in time, about different locations or people or events. And rather than just being like, there's the church, we've all decided it's the most important, and we've decided that the fountain is the second most important, instead of moving through monuments and sharing history as books have told it, I have asked the community to move through spaces and periods of time as they would tell it. So, like, what was their story there? And like, I don't know if it's just me being super like swept up in it and loving it so much, but it feels like it's just building this narrative of things you never consider. Someone sent a photo, Pacifico Valeriat, who turned 101 this September, sent a photo of standing at the bottom of the 100 steps on his 100th birthday. And then another person submitted a photo from about 1921 of a woman standing at the bottom of the 100 steps. So nearly 100 years apart, these two photos. And yet, and Pacifico was probably already alive by the time this first photo was taken. And so people are sharing stories that are as far apart as that, but they've walked the same streets. And they're reflecting on simple things like a set of stairs or a sidewalk or a school. But I'm hearing about how that relationship there changed their life. And so I think they're feeling excited to get to share something that's always been meaningful to them, but would never make the history books. And I'm excited because now we're going to get to spend some time like really sitting in that space. And, you know, to see your favorite stores close around you during this pandemic, to worry about literally everyone all day, every day is heavy. So it's nice to have a project where we can celebrate the past without mourning it, I guess, and to tell it in our own words. And it doesn't have to be important, but I mean, it tells such a beautiful story.
Wow. Wow, Jenny. That's beautiful just in itself. That's really, really awesome. Oh my goodness. I think I'm going to try and wrap up a little bit here. I could go on and on with you guys. I feel like it's just been a really wonderful experience, and I just really value your input in the community, really value your input as people, and thank you for the very personal time with you. I'm just going to thank our viewers. You have been watching Youth for Change, Spotlight on Youth. My name is Lynn McEntee. I'm the host, and we are always looking for ideas. We're all about innovation and steps moving forward, and how do we step outside the box and embrace our changing community and engage in civic engagement. So please message us if you have any ideas for a show, an upcoming podcast, and we will look forward to hearing from you for sure. And I want to thank our guests, Jenny Mitchell and Thurza Armstrong, for joining me today. Look forward to connecting with you again some other time.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. All right, friends, if you could give one piece of advice to the youth of today, and in terms of engaging themselves in community and finding their voice, what would that be, Thurza?
I would say, this is honestly, it sounds so cliche, and I heard it so many times when I was a little bit like not as far into my journey, and now that I'm further, like it's the advice I want to give, but it's not the advice I wanted to hear. Just honestly, it's just relax. I think coming out of high school, you get such this expectation of you go to university, and that's the path that you're supposed to take, and that's the guaranteed path, you know, to be successful and to have the things that you're supposed to have, or whatever that means. But it doesn't work for most people. It doesn't work for a lot of people. And the ones that finish school, there's no guarantee that you're going to have a job in that field, that you're not going to have to go back, that you're not going to change your career at 40 or whatever. So if you don't like your program, if you're not 100% sure of what you even want to do, you don't have to worry. You don't have to just go do a general arts degree because that's what you think you're supposed to and that's what your parents want. I was in a program for 3 years that I really thought I wanted, figured out that it really wasn't for me, and now, you know, I'm 22, and by a lot of metrics I've sort of failed, but by just as many, I'm really successful. You know, people want to talk to me. They want to have me on podcasts. That's really cool. Most 22-year-olds, I don't think, can say that. And so that, I guess, if you feel like you're a failure, you're measuring your life by the wrong metrics, is the advice that I can give.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Yeah, I'd say if you're afraid of getting old or you're in a rush to get old, I'd say both of those things are things to not put your focus on, because there are so many things that I've learned and have been able to do because I've just actually been around longer now. And if I had gotten to know in my early 20s, or out of high school, that the opportunities would just explode, but I'd have to wait like the better part of 20 years. I feel like that for those 20 years, it would have been like a liberation instead of attention. And I think that similar to that, rather than like desperately trying to steer yourself towards these goals and dismissing so many other things along the way, it isn't all your responsibility to make your future manifest as an interesting thing. I think like actively listening, looking for your people, building community and connections and bonds, even if that's just playing music together or making art together or sharing spaces when you're younger, and later it's about working and building. I feel like I don't even feel like I'm working when I'm working most days. And that feels like a huge success. But that was like born out of years and years of slow, just unpacking what responsibility looks like and not pressuring myself to have to feel lame in order to feel like I did a job. You know, so there's just things that perspective had to happen first, and patience, and talking to both Thursday and I, who both own buses, best best thing, in terms of testing patience, in terms of building, like a love of waiting. So, I got my bus in 2013, and it was like 2016 before anyone was in it, I think, or maybe even longer than that. Like years and years and years. And it wasn't years of failing, it was years of waiting, and then incredible things that could have only happened with all of those years and all of the things in between. So just like leaning into your strengths and interests and your community, and waiting if you have to wait, and not feeling bad that in the meantime you can probably even have a little bit of fun, probably.
I actually have a point that could piggyback off of Jenny's really quickly, if that's okay. And it's just that if you, oh shoot, I totally just lost my train of thought. Okay, yeah, if you are doing something and you are actually enjoying it, there's 100% chance like that will take you so much further than something that you think you just have to do. So if you were doing a job and you know, like have a job to pay the bills and just kind of be confident that the things that you enjoy will end up, people will enjoy seeing you enjoy them. You know, draw the things that you like to draw, garden if you love to, you know, the things that you're passionate about, you're going to put more effort into, and that is going to get noticed.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that when it comes to community. When it comes to building community, it's us playing into our strengths. It's each of us bring something to the table. It's like a big potluck of contribution to life. It's like you don't all make the same thing. And so why try to become moderately good at 10 different things that don't fit you? You know, bring the thing that you love and that you can contribute. And if you've built community and you're showing up and you're listening and you're making space, other people will bring those other pieces and you'll build your bus or you'll eat a banquet, you know, and it's just that's what it really comes down to, is finding the missing pieces and celebrating and supporting those people to do what they do, to bring their piece here too. And taking turns supporting each other when one of you can't show up with anything at all for a little bit of time. That's part of community too.
Wow, thank you so much for allowing me to shine light on both of you and all of your contributions. I'm just so thrilled. I feel uplifted and energized, and I can't wait for just hooking up with you again another time. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. This has been honestly a really fun interview.
Totally.
Thank you. You too, guys. Thank you so much. I've got the other outro, so we're good.
All right. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. And the only thing we ask is that you promote it, because it's a new show and we're just trying to really get it out there. And sometimes it's just building momentum, as you know, right?
Yeah.
So thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye.
Guys, take care. Take care. Nice to meet you, Thursday. Take care.
Nice to meet you as well.
Right on. Take care.
Bye.